gave the Pope a New York Knicks jersey. He's the 14th Pope, so it's number 14.
With Mercy, a judicial system powered by artificial intelligence with access to every camera, cell phone, and database.
A number of months ago, I was having a very interesting and deep conversation with a man who was my senior. He was an Englishman, and we came to the conclusion that after hundreds and thousands of years, man does and repeats the same thing over and over again. He never learns from the mistakes of his forefathers. He may go to military schools and study war, and guess what? He still continues the same wars, which doesn't quite make sense. So in this study, it is going to be split into two parts. It is called History Repeats Itself. In the first hour and a half, we'll be looking at history from a secular perspective. And in the last hour, we'll be looking at history from a biblical perspective. And as I encourage you at all times, as most people, unfortunately, in this life are followers, please research everything you see in this study.
Each layer of history provides us hope, a way to chart our future, carved into the earth itself. The lessons of one age foretell the next. And if there's hope for one of us, countless stories are carved into the Earth's strata. The lessons of one age augur the next. We must learn from our past. The future is waiting.
Now, it may shock you, and it will definitely surprise you, but the one and only place in the world that has preserved the legacies of all ancient civilizations, rulers, ethnicities, and cultures is not the public libraries, neither the global elite academic institutions, nor even among monthly magazines and peer-reviewed journals, but by an American businessman and computer programmer whose name is Sid Meier, where a strategy-based video game series is named after him. The many lost chapters of human history hidden away in a memory, dumped in a neglected trash heap, and neglected by deeply biased, institutionalized, and well-trained romanticized historians, has received a brand new facelift by this very intelligent businessman. In the US Capitol building, there is a bust of a famous historical figure, whose artifacts are in both the British Museum in London, England, and in the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. He was an Amorite king of Babylon who has one of the oldest preserved law codes in human history. Now, his name was Hammurabi, where a replica of his law code is in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, Germany, but he is also in the British Museum. He is one of the earliest figures of antiquity in this video game. Now in the British Museum are many of these historical figures, for their tablets with King Nebuchadnezzar II name inscribed on them. There is a famous Cyrus cylinder, a painting of Pharaoh Ramses II, and coins of both Julius Caesar of Rome and Cleopatra of the Ptolemy lineage of Egypt. Now King Nebuchadnezzar II is canonized in that game, as well as Pharaoh Ramses II, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, and King Cyrus II, also known as the Great of Persia, who you will see in the second half of this study, where his famous tomb still stands, tall, erect, and preserved even to this very day in modern-day Iran in Western Asia. What makes Sid Meier unique is that he goes around the nations of the world and gives each people group their credit. I will single out 3 figures, but first we shall see how vast this man's mind has stretched. You have Saladin of Arabia in Western Asia, who fought against the Crusades, Basil II, the famous emperor of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of China in East Asia and founder of the Qin dynasty and famous for the terracotta army collection of sculptures, Lady Sixsky, a Mayan queen of Mexico in Central America, Trajan, a famous Roman emperor, Carthage, a monarch and warrior of Indonesia in Southeast Asia and Oceania, Pachacuti, a ruler of the Incan Empire in Peru in South America, Coupe, the Maori navigator of New Zealand in Southwest Pacific in Oceania, Dido, the first queen of the Phoenician city of Carthage in modern-day Tunisia in North Africa, Chandragupta, a emperor of an empire in India in South Asia, Genghis Khan, the Mongolian emperor who had the largest empire covering a land mass, Robert the Bruce, the king of the Scots in Northern Europe, Shaka Zulu, king of the Zulu kingdom in South Africa, Ambiorix, leader of a Belgic tribe of northeastern Gaul in modern-day Belgium in northwestern Europe, and Zinga, the ruler queen in what is now modern-day Angola, Lady True, a female warrior in Vietnam in Southeast Asia, Amina Toure, a queen of the kingdom of ancient Kush in modern-day Sudan, and Mansa Musa, who was the ruler of the Mali Empire in West Africa, just to name a few of them. So this computer programmer reintroduced often neglected historical figures, but let us briefly look at 3 of them in Afro-Eurasia who have all shaped and influenced human history. Now, the modern Western world has always had a fascination with the ancient Greeks and have never given up on keeping that legacy alive. And one of its heroes opened the doors to Western expansionism, and he became a leader when his father, Philip II of Macedon, was assassinated. His name was Alexander III of Macedon, and his contemporaries and successors in the West have labeled him the Great. Near the end of the second half of this study, you will see the central role he has played on succeeding generations in the Greco-Roman world. His teacher and mentor was Aristotle, but they eventually parted ways over differences of opinion. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he also had a fascination with zoology, that is the study of both animals and plants. And when he defeated Darius III, he extended the European culture into the largest continent on the earth, Asia in the east. Now there are busts and medals of him in museums in England, and there is even an artifact in Babylonian cuneiform in the British Museum that records his death. He is highly respected in the Western world for his role in reshaping the demographics in Afro-Eurasia, but it was his successors who described him best, as his contemporaries' accounts are very, very scant. Plutarch, the historian, in his book titled The Age of Alexander, when describing him, he said, quote, "Alexander was only 20 years old when he inherited his kingdom. As for the size of his army, the lowest estimate puts the strength of 30,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry and the highest 43,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. Now Darius was a tall and handsome man, but he abandoned his armor, and the Persian Empire was regarded as having been completely overthrown, and Alexander was proclaimed king of Asia. First witness. In a book titled Natural History by the very detailed and traveled writer Pliny the Elder, when describing this Greek ruler, he said, quote, King Alexander the Great had a burning desire to acquire a knowledge of zoology and delegated research in this field to Aristotle, a man of supreme authority in every branch of science. Second witness. In a book titled The Geography of Strabo, or Strabo, he showed that Alexander opened up another field of study, and he said, quote, For Alexander, he said, opened up for us geographers a great part of Asia and all the northern part of Europe as far as the Ister, that is the Danube River. Third witness. So Alexander III wasn't just a conqueror, but he expanded fields of knowledge to the Greek world in geography and zoology, and this is why Sid Meier made sure that he received a place in history. Now, the Ottoman Empire of Turkey in Asia Minor was one of the least known ancient systems from the medieval age to the early 20th century. Its most famous ruler was a man described in the Western world as Solomon the Magnificent. Like the Amorite king of Babylon, he is also on display in the US Capitol building as a great ruler. Now, this is his own signature written in his language, but many of his enemies were the monarchs of Catholic Europe, especially King Charles V of the House of Habsburg, who was a Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain. There are documents that are published that details the battles between these two men. But there are two Western historians who observed and studied his brilliance as a leader and how his war strategies even protected Christians. Now, in a book titled Ottoman Turks by the 19th century English historian Sir Edward Shepherd Creasy, this very detailed scholar, when describing him, said, quote, Sultan Solomon I, termed by European writers as Solomon the Great and Solomon the Magnificent, bears in the histories written by his own countrymen the titles of Solomon Konuni, Solomon the Lawyer, and Solomon Sahibi Quran, Solomon the Lord of his age. At the age of 26, he became Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and Solomon was the 10th Sultan of the House of Othman. He had an army of 100,000 men along the western coast of Asia Minor. Now, the first acts of Sultan Solomon announced that an earnest love of justice and generous magnanimity would be the leading principles of the reign. Solomon commands to his viceroy, which is a high official, was to repress every kind of disorder among both rich and poor. Under his active and skillful superintendence, new buildings for ornaments and use in peace and war rose rapidly in the principal cities of the empire. First witness. In a 3-volume set titled The History of Protestantism, the 19th century Western historian Dr. James Aiken Wiley observed the Ottoman Empire by both a prophetic angle in Revelation chapter 9 and from a moral perspective. And he said, quote, The second woe trumpet was the Turkish invasion in Revelation chapter 9 and verse 13. And the capture of Constantinople in 1453 formed the acme or the supremacy of that power. Asia, he said, owed the scepter to Solomon the Magnificent. Often were his hordes seen hovering like a cloud charged with lightning on the frontier of Christendom. Now, when a crisis arose in the affairs of the Reformation, and the kings obedient to the Roman see had united their swords to strike, and with a blow so decisive that they should not need to strike a second time, the Ottoman Turk, obeying one whom he knew not, who is Yah, would straightway present himself on the eastern limits of Europe, and in so menacing an attitude that the swords unsheathed against the poor Protestants had to be turned to another quarter. The Ottoman Turk was the lightning rod that drew off the tempest. Thus did Jesus Christ cover his flock with the shield of the Muslim. Second witness. So Solomon the Magnificent, also canonized by Sid Meier, like Alexander, played a pivotal role in human history. And we have looked at Eurasia. Now let us go to the global south, to the continent of Africa. Ethiopia, located in the Horn of Africa in East Africa, is the largest, most populated landlocked country on the earth, whose highlands are the largest continuous mountain ranges in Africa, with the most hottest inhabited place on the earth. It also has the longest river in the world running through it, the River Nile. Its Sof Omar cave has been described as the largest cave on the continent of Africa, though today that is being disputed. It has species that are endemic, like the Walaya ibex, the red-chested Galada baboon, and the Ethiopian wolf, also called the red jackal. Some of these creatures are endangered, where they can only be found in Ethiopia. It is the home of the coffee bean, where today it is one of the world's most consumed beverage. Though the Avatar franchise promoted the once worldwide belief of ancestor worship that seems to be coming back, in Avatar Way of Water, one of the female Na'vi hairstyle is from the albaso braids of the Habesha women of Ethiopia, so you can see where some of its influences have spread. It has a very deep-rooted Christian heritage, where its beautiful churches are carved downwards from solid rock, where it also has an irrigation system to hold water so it doesn't flood over. Ethiopia also has the oldest illustrated Bible on the earth, so it has a very rich but little known history to outsiders. It has modernized, and with those who have the money, they are purchasing EVs, that is, electronic vehicles, from China. But with well over 80 different ethnic groups, and with a history of being dominated by a small few of them, over time something has to give that has sadly resulted in inter-ethnic conflicts. Even with its deep heritage, that hasn't stopped the poverty and its unwritten record of domestic servitude. Outsiders in the digital space have also been accused of stirring up the already hostile climate, where they are being sued for inciting and stirring up ethnic strife. But this isn't the first time outside forces have tried and failed to influence domestic affairs. Most of what I'm about to share with you on Ethiopia is documented in these two books: The Battle of Adwa by Raymond Harris, a US professor of history, on the left, and Victory of Adwa by Abib Haile Melekot on the right. Now, Sid Meier introduced Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia, who protected his country against imperialism. Now, the Assyrian lion hunts once dominated the plains of northern Iraq, and it continued into the Medo-Persian Empire. And these artifacts are in the British Museum, but it still continues unabated in Africa. And this monarch, Menelik II, is adorned in his royal regalia with a dead lion as a trophy. And continuing his nation's tradition, he had coins struck in his image like his predecessors, but he wanted to modernize Ethiopia. So with his trademark headscarf covered with a hat, a fashion later incorporated by US rappers, he invited descendants of slaves from the diaspora in the Caribbean in the French-speaking West Indies, men like Benito Sylvain. On the right, the Haitian journalist, diplomat and lawyer who represented Ethiopia at the first Pan-African Congress in 1900 in London, England. And Dr. Joseph Vitalian from the island of either Guadeloupe or Martinique on the bottom left, the French doctor who ran and oversaw the hospital in Harar in Ethiopia, who also helped to fight a smallpox epidemic in 1904 in that country. Now, in this very rare photo, Dr. Vitalian stands just behind Emperor Menelik II, where he's singled out in his black Western regalia, for he became the emperor's personal physician and doctor from 1904 to 1909, and he also assisted other members of the Ethiopian nobility. It was Ras Makonnen who employed him to become a doctor, where he taught his son the French language. And this young man, when he became king, in his memoirs documented how the West Indian French doctor educated him in French, and he is the infamous Haile Selassie, better known in some spaces as Rastafari. But there were other West Indians who also wanted to preserve Menelik II's legacy. In London, England, there are a number of flats that some people call an apartment, and on it there is a plaque that reads George Padmore, the Trinidadian-born communist turned Pan-Africanist. He was very well connected. Now, he worked in Joseph Stalin's government in communist Russia. He was jailed and deported to England from Hitler's Nazi Germany. And in London's National Archives in Kew Gardens, the British government kept files on him and constantly surveillance him, for they feared his Pan-African views would influence the colonies in Africa. And Baron Archibald Fern Brockway, a backbencher who was a member of Parliament and the House of Lords for the Labour Party, was one of his long-time allies and friend. He was the advisor to Ghana President Kwame Nkrumah, as his eulogy says in the New York Times. And like many men and women from the Caribbean, he wanted to reconnect the people from the diaspora to the African continent to heal those deep-rooted rifts. So among his friends was Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Richard Wright and C.L.R. James. And in his book, The Life and Struggles of Negro Toilers, when describing Menelik, he said, quote, Abyssinia, another name for Ethiopia, is a feudal monarchy. Historically, it is one of the oldest kingdoms in the world. Menelik was one of the greatest rulers of the country. First witness, but he wasn't the only one who said it.
A group of Democratic lawmakers is urging President Biden to exonerate the late legendary civil rights leader Marcus Garvey.
Just before President Joe Biden left office, on request of many in the black community, he pardoned the late Jamaican Pan-Africanist Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He gave him clemency and he pardoned him for his false accusations under President Calvin Coolidge on mail fraud charges. Now, when Marcus Garvey was incarcerated in the United States for those charges, before he was deported to Jamaica, he wrote a poem detailing Western colonialism. And in 1927 it was called The Tragedy of White Injustice. And a portion of it documents why Emperor Menelik is respected. And Garvey said, quote, The black archers of Ethiopia stood at Marathon proving their stern manhood. Italians Menelik put to chase, beating a retreat in uneven haste. What was Marcus Garvey talking about? Well, Pope Leo XIII made a complaint to Emperor Menelik II because his fellow Italians ate more than they can chew. And what did they do? Well, in the British Museum, when you take the back entrance and go up the stairs, before you go into the Egyptian room, there is a painting called the Battle of Adwa of 1896. And in this battle, the Italian army got absolutely battered. The New York Times in 1896 said that the Ethiopians wiped out 3 100,000 men. That is an absolute massacre. My advice, they should have stayed in Italy. Now, the New York Times in 1935 said Menelik's army cut the Italians to pieces. And this is why he is respected as a leader, because his military with arms imported from France and Russia. With Menelik and his wife, they defeated the Italians with a nation that wanted to modernize the country of Ethiopia. So Sid Meier wants to give history its rightful place. But we are now living in an age where people are deeply searching for historical truths, where they want clarity on how this world works. For there's so much deception out there, and people want the truth. Well, some of them do. And it can be real difficult, for there's so much stuff being unearthed about ancient cultures and ancient civilizations, giving us new light on ancient cultures. But not only are there ongoing and very heated debates between men on ancient cultures and our ancient origins, but the entertainment industry and the US government are feeding that curiosity, but they are leading men down the wrong path.
This morning, U.S. intelligence agencies confirm hundreds of additional UAP sightings have been reported. UAP stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena.
Whistleblowers also on Capitol Hill who allege the government is holding back crucial information about UAPs, unexplained aerial phenomena, what many of us still call UFOs.
In the halls of Congress, Navy pilots are speaking out.
This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains.
Indianapolis, Aries 31 has traffic 2 o'clock, slightly above.
Can you say aircraft type?
Negative, Center. No distinct outline. Tell you the truth, the target is rather brilliant.
If you found out we weren't alone, if someone showed you, proved it to you, would that frighten you?
Good morning, Kansas City. Let's take a look at today. Today is today's.
Why would he make such a vast universe? Yet save it only for us?
Okay, action!
For more than 50 years, Steven Spielberg has been dazzling audiences with his signature brand of movie magic. He's the wizard behind some of the biggest films of all time. His movies quicken our pulses, capture our imaginations, touch our hearts, or break them. And along the way, he has introduced us to new stars, new technology, and new ways to see the world. His stories have forever shaped popular culture.
For 100 days, I'm going to cross the 7 continents. Because the answers to everything important are out there at the edges of our world.
Now, I have dedicated much of my life to the restoration of harmony between humanity, nature, and the environment.
We are nature ourselves. We are a part of it, not apart from it.
It is becoming ever so clearer that some of the most influential personalities in the world are very subtly teaching this generation to go back to nature worship and its indigenous beliefs under the clever pretext of preserving the environment to help humanity. But I do believe that there was this king who once wrote that there is nothing new under the sun, and modern man just repeats the same cycle of his forefathers over and over again. In ancient Rome, the leaders would greet one another with an outstretched arm, and there are men today who are just mimicking their forebears. This Asian deity called Garuda in the British Museum has its arms stretched out and its fingers, well, two of them in a certain posture. 2 fingers on the side up and the thumb is covering the other 2. And today, metal rock fans also mimic this deity. Nothing new. Have you ever wondered why influential people in entertainment use their tongue as a gesture? Who are they mimicking? Well, in the British Museum is the Indian female deity called Kali, who is adorned with human heads and her hands are covered with blood. And in most of her statues, her tongue is out, where the Rolling Stones band has embraced Kali as their logo. Now the Rolling Stones are like pagan ink, and these baby boomers' famous song that you see them singing is entitled Sympathy for the Devil, where they have always incorporated pagan iconography. In the British Museum is this Babylonian lion, and guess what? The Rolling Stones incorporated this on one of their album covers. Guess what? Nothing new. This is the Egyptian goddess Ishtar in the British Museum, and guess what? She's no different to other female deities around the world. And Rihanna, the Bayesian musician, had her tattooed on her chest. This generation does not introduce nothing new. They lack originality. Many of the top companies name themselves after ancient deities, for I shall say again, modern man lacks originality, and one of the largest sports franchises on the earth is named after this female Greek deity in the British Museum, who is called Nike, who is the goddess of victory and battle. Now, Pan's Labyrinth was a 2006 Spanish language dark fantasy film that was written, directed and co-produced by the Jesuit-educated Mexican filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. Another introduction to ancient pagan deities. But who exactly is Pan? Where we get the word pantheism from? Well, many may think that it is a Greek deity with a torso of a man and the legs and hooves of a goat. But on this Mesopotamian cylinder from Iraq in the British Museum, dated to around 2000 BC, you can clearly see that the figure standing third from right is who the Greeks incorporated into their pagan belief system. Now, it was in the 19th century where men started to get trained on how to go back to nature worship, teaching that we are one with the environment. But there is a slight problem. There is a lack of evidence for this man-made belief system. And if I were a secular scientist, I would be embarrassed to know that I am teaching the masses blatant falsehoods and theories where there's absolutely no evidence at all. I mean, how long are they going to keep lying to people about their speculation on the Earth's early origins? What is even more crazy, that even in the 21st century, with all these sophisticated technology, where they still can't explain how the pyramids of Egypt were built, they still say that we are descendants of guess who? Through the ever so skillful and colourful cinematography of men like the late Stanley Kubrick, these ideas about man's early origins have been cleverly embedded in people's minds. And don't forget that the late Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Odyssey was based upon Charles Darwin's unscientific worldview on the Earth's origins. And modern man, unlike his earlier forebears, has been falsely educated that he has reached the pinnacle of intelligence, and that we are still evolving to a higher level, and the companies are also promoting it in their products.
Progress. Its pulse extends toward worlds yet unseen. With AI robotics at our side, humanity moves forward to achieve the next innovation. Together, as partners, we awaken the dawn of infinite possibility. Partnering Human Progress.
Now, all over the world, men different in skin tone, different eye colors. He has different hair texture and different hair color, with different shaped noses and different colored lips. But even though he foolishly argues over these trivial and minor differences, he is still the exact same species who accomplishes the exact same things as his forefathers. Nothing has changed. And throughout the demographics of Afro-Eurasia, they all use the same materials, and the British Museum, in my humble opinion, is our greatest teacher. There is pottery from the Sudan and pottery from Egypt in Africa, pottery from Iraq and pottery from Iran in Western Asia, and pottery in Britain in Northern Europe, dating to antiquity. And after thousands of years, guess what? Man is still doing pottery. Nothing has changed. Early man was skillfully able to carve into different metals from very early. These are bronze vases from Mesopotamia, a face carved from metal in ancient Rome, and a bronze face from the Sudan. Man was able to perfect the human form from stone. This is a stone face from Medo-Persia. This is a stone face from Egypt. And this is also a stone face from ancient Rome. Man was also able to use wood from trees. This is a wooden coffin from ancient Egypt, a wooden instrument from Mesopotamia in Iraq, and a wooden wheel from ancient Greece or Italy. Now, when man has closely observed his early forebears, what he has found is quite shocking. As they have been able to unfreeze the Ice Age and discover the truth about humanity's deep past, he has observed studies like botanical science and math goes back to antiquity. A portion of a prehistoric pottery discovered in the Levant confirms that ancient man was skilled at math. These artifacts are smashed into pieces the Captain Caveman narrative, and it is confirming that he was sophisticated from antiquity, for he was able to master metals, as we have shown from very, very early, more or less all over the globe, and it still continues. This is a very old gold jug from ancient Britain, a gold jug from Medo-Persia, and these sophisticated vases from ancient Egypt have lids of gold. The oldest art studio and the earliest evidence of chemistry was discovered in South Africa. Now, these discoveries should make you stop and think, but guess what? There's more. They discovered a beautifully carved stone bracelet in Siberia from antiquity, a carving of a human heart in Mexico, the oldest mirror in Turkey carved from obsidian, the oldest crown from metal discovered in the Levant, the oldest shoes made from plants discovered in North America, the oldest fish hooks in the world found in Japan in Asia, and the oldest counting tools and records of maths were discovered in South Africa. So were our early forefathers stupid and backwards like the Captain Caveman narrative promotes? Well, the oldest bracelet confirmed that our ancestors who could drill into stone were far more sophisticated than we thought. The oldest crown was found in a Dead Sea cave, and it is 4,000 years old. The earliest fish hooks from Japan were carved from seashell snails. The world's oldest counting tool shows that early man was extremely gifted in maths. The Olmecs of Central America have the earliest image in the world of the human heart. The world's oldest shoes are on display in the United States, where they were discovered in Oregon, and the oldest Neolithic mirrors from Southwest Asia in Catalhubek in Turkey show that our early forebears were not these stupid, backward, primeval cave-dwelling savages, but were sophisticated from antiquity. And after thousands of years, history just repeats itself because we still use mirrors like our forefathers. We continue to do maths like our forefathers. We continue to study the human heart like our forebears, and perform successful surgeries that preserves human life. The nobility in a few nations still wears crowns, and man still fishes like his forebears, which confirms that after thousands of years, he is still doing the exact same thing. No natural selection or evolving taking place. So the evidence contradicts the theory, and it is very clear that those who compile these theories are men of European descent who don't even bother to assess their own history. For the oldest gold object in the world was discovered in Bulgaria. The oldest representation of the human face was discovered in France that was carved from ivory. The oldest musical instrument was made from bone and was discovered in Germany. The oldest wooden wheel was found in Slovenia, and the oldest plough was discovered in Italy. And how exactly sophisticated were Europeans' early forebears? Well, the cave art in both France and Spain smashes to pieces the Captain Caveman narrative. And when they looked closely at the details of this cave art, it contradicted this early perception of man. For in a study titled The Supreme Visual Perception Hypothesis, Neuroaesthetics of Cave Art, a portion of it reads, quote, "We propose that archaic primary consciousness, as opposed to modern secondary consciousness, included a savant-like perception with a what? How did they describe their forebears? A superior richness of details compared to modern man." Interesting. So with all the brilliant artwork in our modern art galleries, it still can't surpass the cave art of Europe. But they weren't the only skilled ones. In the British Museum, there is a paint set from the ancient Egyptians, and they use all different bright colors in their art. But how do we differ from them today? Well, they had furniture in their house. Well, the elite did. They used the sickle for plowing. They had their own toiletries, just like us today. This is the oldest wooden cutlery set in the world that is found in Manchester Museum. And they use pen for ink and paper to write. The ancient Egyptians, according to the journal Science, were the oldest people on the earth to have used cats as pets. Sometimes it was deified. But after thousands of years, modern man still have cats as pets. He also uses pen and paper to write. He also has furniture in his house, and to sometimes economize, he will use wooden cutlery. So how do we differ from them? Well, in a book titled Nineveh and Its Remains, Sir Austin Henry Layard is clear that the ancients differed to us in their belief system, in that they believed they came from a sophisticated culture from antiquity. And he said, quote, "That the ancients, however, possessed mechanical means for moving large masses is evident from the enormous blocks used in the monuments of Egypt and from the stones forming the basement of the temple of Baalbek. All that is necessary to admit is that those who preceded us by many centuries were not deficient in ingenuity and reflection, and that experience and study had made them familiar with many things of which we would boast ourselves the inventors." In other words, there is no new thing under the sun. History just repeats itself. Now, the Chaldees of Iraq still nourish the traditions of their ancient greatness, and many have endeavored in satisfying the curiosity of a stranger to assign the highest antiquity to their monuments. The most ancient sculptures we possess are the most correct and severe in form, and show the highest degree of taste in the details. The very great antiquity of the early monuments of Egypt, however much we may differ between the highest and the lowest date claimed for them, is now generally admitted. Even the conventional forms of Egypt are accompanied by extreme beauty in the details and in the shape of the domestic furniture and utensils, which proved that those who invented them were capable of the highest culture, and if unfettered might have attained to the highest perfection. So Sir Austin Henry Layard, a well-travelled British ambassador, knew that the primeval savage Captain Caveman theory that was developing in his day does not align with the evidence that is available. But we are sadly living in a climate where as many people are becoming more isolated and communities decline, people are seeking for an identity, especially within a tribal group. But many of these modern ideas within these groups are unfortunately rooted in either fantasy or racial or religious superiority, and it can be found in ethnic groups of Afro-Eurasian descent. Let us first look at China in East Asia. The Chinese have one of the oldest continuous cultures or civilizations on earth that does give them a sense of pride and stability. And many things that the world uses today come from China, such as tea, the compass and paper that the Muslims introduced into Europe. As she has become a fast developing economy in the 21st century, she leads the electronic car industry, importing it to countries like Brazil, and as we shown earlier, Ethiopia also. It has the world's largest 26 megawatt offshore wind turbine with the world's leading number of solar panels, where she also dominates the world in renewable energy. And she has been pushing to take over Britain's Thames water. Yep, her tentacles stretch very far. But she is still very vulnerable. In the year 2025, there was a huge rise in youth unemployment in China that seems to be pouring into the year 2026. And China is the largest importer of crude oil on the earth. And if those energy imports stopped coming into her shores, she would struggle. She is Iran's main customer, and America knows that if it invades or strikes Iran, it could weaken China big time. But she also imports her gas from Russia, and she is a big player on the world stage, especially within BRICS, and has gotten to the head of many of its citizens, where some believe that the Chinese are a superior race of people. Now, in an article in the South China Morning Post, one man made a bold statement, quote, and forgive me if I pronounce some words wrong. Wang Hoking, a retired art history professor at Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, Zhejiang province, told the Southern Weekly newspaper that, I think the history of civilization will be rewritten in the future. And the truth is, he claims, is that China is the main birthplace of civilization, he says. Interesting. Now, in the year 2025, a 1.5 hour documentary was published to the public that you can watch for free online called Truth Rising. Now, if you watch it, it is like reading Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, making the claim, like that Chinese professor, that Western civilization was like no other in human history, and it is superior to all of its predecessors, where it totally whitewashes history, ignoring all the atrocities that the West has committed to itself and is still doing to its own civilians in the West and those who they colonized. It is nothing more than white supremacy, racial superiority and imperialism under the disguise of Christianity, where not the Bible but only white people have the answer to the world's problems. Now, in the 19th century, a few West Indians in America started to make claims that they are the true Jews. Since then, they have split into many brands, but today its most popular group are men who dress like they are auditioning for Battlestar Galactica and the Return of the Jedi. And they don't like to be labeled Hebrew Israelites, so they call themselves Israel United in Christ. And like the documentary Truth Rising, they believe that blacks, that is people of African descent, are God's true chosen people on earth. Well, the ones who are descendants of slaves, so every other racial group is basically eternally damned in their eyes. There was one man who knew that idea was very dangerous and totally foolish, and William Whitaker said, quote, "The mistake of the Jews who prided themselves in a genealogical kind of sanctity as being the seed of Abraham. Time was indeed when salvation was of the Jews, but that wall of partition being now taken down, and the pale of the church so far enlarged as to take in both Jew and Gentile." Now please look at the words highlighted in blue. No national or ethnic or racial privilege can now commend us to God. Argument done. Nor can a succession of Abraham according to the flesh avail us unless we succeed him in his faith. So what exactly is true history? Is it important to study it, or is it just a load of meaningless, irrelevant, endless data that overloads our brains and leads us to nowhere? And where is the most influential place on earth to learn it from? And what is the dominant ideology of the world, and are these prevailing ideas true, or have we all been either misled, duped, or deceived? Well, let us try and attempt to answer this question from a very balanced, non-bipartisan, critical thinking approach. Now, the very word history, according to the Reader's Digest Great Encyclopedic Dictionary, is a continuous methodical record in order of time of important or public events, and it is a study of formation and growth of communities and nations, where a whole chain of events are connected with a particular country, person, thing, etc., post-events in general, and the course of human affairs. So how do we approach it? Well, in a book titled The History of the Reformation of the 16th Century, though Darby himself approached history from a Eurocentric perspective, he still laid down a solid principle, and he said, quote, "The historian can choose a path for himself in the wide field open to his labors. He may either describe those great events which alter the condition of a people or change the aspect of the universe, or he may delineate the ways of that tranquil and progressive course regarding the affairs of a nation or of the church or of human nature, which usually follows the occurrence of striking mutations of the social system." Now, I have been observing online the wrong approach to history, where races are approaching history from a Darwinian hierarchy of races approach, and I'll prove to you that this is quite silly. Now, a good portion of the largest continent on the earth, that is Asia, has exploded in technological innovation in the 21st century, and as many of the nations like Japan have embraced a Western model of how to run its economy, they are flourishing, where they have been labeled by the West the model minority, for different ethnic groups to emulate. And the nation that has the highest academic rates for students on the earth is Singapore in Southeast Asia, where they have ranked as #1 for years. Now, who created this hierarchy to measure a nation's standard of brilliance? Well, it is Alfred Binet, a French psychologist who co-invented the first practical intelligence test that today we call IQ, an abbreviation for intelligence quota. And the few men who have been a standard model for the world are Albert Einstein, the late Stephen Hawking, and Bill Gates. But something's quite interesting. Romani Wilfred, when a young boy, shocked the British Isles for his intelligence. Today, he is a research assistant at the UK's University of Cambridge. But when he was 16, his IQ was a lot higher than both Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and Bill Gates. But he was not alone. When Stephen Wiltshire, now in his early 50s, was a young boy, he could draw whole cities from his memory. And he is still doing the same thing, where he goes up in a helicopter, looks at a city and memorizes it. And guess what? He is autistic, and scientists scratch their head and are in awe on how the human brain can accomplish such brilliance. Now, for those who are not familiar with the UK, when you are 16, you take your exams where you will pass your GCSEs, and then you go into further education, into college. But something isn't making sense. There are black children in the UK as young as 6 years old who are taking their GCSEs and passing them with flying colours. Now, very few people are aware of this. Now, do you want to know why? Well, the Western system focuses on the crimes but ignores the successes of the black community. Now, how does a 6-year-old boy become a student at Oxford University? That doesn't make sense. But you can kind of see why they banned blacks from reading during slavery. Because they become very dangerous when they start to read. Especially when you see a 2-year-old boy on America's Got Talent breaking down multiplications and divisions off his head with no calculator, which just dazzled the crowd. Now, I would always ask myself, why is it that when young black children start school, they excel? But the moment they start secondary or high school, something starts to spiral out of control. Well, something does happen inside of the womb. And when scientists closely observed black babies, they did observe something unique, as documented in a peer-reviewed study. Quote, African infants learn motor skills substantially earlier than American and European infants. Now, it is YouTube that is the most influential place on the earth that teaches the world about religion, history, and current affairs. And there is not a platform on the earth that has that level of influence. And it is on this platform where people, if you look in the comment section, they will tell you that they sometimes learn more from one historian or one program than what they have learned throughout their whole lives. Now, its current CEO is a man by the name of Neil Mohan. And recent studies have shown that YouTube has now become more influential than our television screens, where there is 20 billion hours of content that is now being viewed daily, where it maintains the largest share of TV viewing among media companies. With that level of influence, the once most powerful media outlet on the earth, the BBC, wants a cut, and they are trying to push for license fees. How that will work, who knows, but there will be some fight back. But we are living in a climate of lack of trust and less accountability and revisionism. Now, AI has its benefits, for it can enhance a quality of work at a minimum cost. But sometimes you can look at something and you are wondering, was that a real wildlife nature video, or was that digitally manipulated? And people are aware that they can bring dead people back to life with AI. So it can also manipulate the past. Now, AI is unlocking ancient texts and could rewrite history. That is not really a bad thing, but the technology is revising a whole lot of history. And as many of this generation has no pleasure in reading, it is becoming very apparent and quite clear that the book Orwell's 1984 said many years ago, one of the very attempts of the New World Order is to distort the past and rewrite history, so we will not know what is taking place in the present. Now in the UK, historians complain that Britain is rewriting its own history and becoming what they call woke. But Britain has always rewrote history when fresh data is discovered, and with less students in the UK taking history, and with succeeding administrations, whether they be Conservative or Labour, trying to clamp down on homeschooling, there will be a challenge for true history to be taught. Now, UK historians fail to tell you that the British are absolutely masters of whitewashing their own history and cleverly destroy their colonial history so that succeeding generations have a little idea on how they ruled abroad around the world. So who do you trust in the media? Well, Britain and France both bombed the Islamic State in Syria. But Iran makes it clear that the Islamic State is a creation of Israel's Mossad, Britain's MI6 and the US CIA, like all other jihadi groups, who are nothing more than products of the West. Now, the Western media is also cleverly trying to separate Russia from Europe, but Russia is in Eurasia, and that is propaganda history. Turkey says that Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested for genocide, but Turkey has denied its own history of genocide against the Armenians in World War I, and those who address it in Turkey are, guess what, jailed. That's called double standards. So how should we approach the past? Now, should Europe confront her legacy of colonialism around the world and give reparations? That is the question MEPs are posing to the European Parliament. And President Donald Trump is trying to rewrite US history because the US legacy is very intertwined and tied with slavery, especially when some of the highest personalities in the US government are descendants of slave owners. For America struggles to uphold the mainstream romanticized history and its real true history that confirms that it has always been run by a class system of men of European descent.
We designed a meritocracy designed around the skills we ourselves possess and rigged the game so we succeeded and everybody else failed. By age 12, American children of affluent kids are 4 grade levels above everybody else. By university age, rich kids are 77 times more likely to go to university or to Ivy League university than kids from poor schools. In adulthood, 54% of the people at elite workplaces went to the same 34 elite colleges. So we ended up creating a caste system. Some people think Donald Trump is a populist. Donald Trump and Elon Musk went to the University of Pennsylvania and Ivy League school and became billionaires. J.D. Vance went to Yale. Pete Hegseth went to Princeton and Yale. Stephen Miller went to Duke. Fox News types like Laura Ingraham went to Dartmouth. And they represent the educated elite.
President Trump is ordering a review of America's museums in an attempt to get rid of exhibits he doesn't like. He's specifically targeting the world's largest museum complex, the Smithsonian. The president says museums should focus more on America's brightness and not how bad slavery was.
The American Revolutionary Movement served as a model for freedom from oppression.
America is predicated on an idea that tells us who we are, where we came from, and what our forebears were willing to die for.
Collins said no taxation without representation. The fear was, if we give in to this precedent, what will they do in the future?
It gave them a space to make this democracy real.
And I think what it set in motion is what actually we're seeing in 2016. That is to say, with 1776, you had the progressive expropriation of land from the indigenous population, and then that land was parceled out, oftentimes to Europeans fresh off the boat, which helps to solidify a cross-class coalition between poor Europeans and more affluent Europeans at the expense of the indigenous population and, of course, the Africans who then stocked that land as enslaved, bonded laborers. And in 2016, once again, you see a kind of cross-class coalition on the Republican side between and amongst Europeans of various class backgrounds And for those who say or who think that Make America Great Again fundamentally means Make America White Again, well, they have a point to be made. I think part of the problem is that since we haven't had a critique of 1776 to the extent that it deserves one, it becomes very difficult to understand the present.
So there is a very ongoing, intense battle on who can control how we look at the world by interpreting the past. And this is one of the main reasons why many people just totally close off to history and shut down, because of the clashing of principles. But if we go throughout time in Afro-Eurasia, all races have acquired a huge amount of wealth. There's no inferior or superior race, whether it be by clean or by corrupted ways. Some have acquired wealth through black gold that is called oil. Others have acquired wealth through one of the most ancient rare earths, the metal called gold. And men like Genghis Khan of Asia, the Mongolian ruler, acquired his wealth from the control of land which he conquered. Now in this library in France, there is a very old manuscript dated to 1375 AD, and it is called the Catalan Atlas, and it has rulers from Afro-Eurasia. But in recent times, its most popular figure is Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire in West Africa. Now today, both Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are revered as economic titans. But Mansa Musa's wealth of $87 billion far outstripped both of these men. While being the richest man in human history, none of today's billionaires don't even come close to his fortunes. Now in more recent times, the first modern billionaire was actually the American industrialist Henry Ford, and he was actually richer than John D. Rockefeller Sr. according to the New York Times. But when the South China Morning Post reviewed the 10 richest people who have ever lived, they were all of Afro-Eurasian descent. And the article included John D. Rockefeller Sr., Genghis Khan in the center, and Mansa Musa on the right. So there is no such thing as a superior race or ethnic group, and I'll give two more examples that will show that we are all the same. Now, how long have men been playing stringed instruments, especially the most famous one called the guitar? Well, in London's Royal College of Music in South Kensington, it has a very small museum that you could tour in about 15 minutes. And it has on display the oldest known guitar in the world. So how long has this instrument been around for? Well, in a book titled The Music of the Most Ancient Nations, Karl Engel, this 19th century German historian, said, quote, "Most nations advance in music, and the lyre appears to have been a favorite instrument with most nations whose musical instruments are known to us. Some harps may probably have been strung differently from others. The Oriental harp is now but seldom found out of Asia. The Finns preserved it the longest. Now the Negroes in West Africa and in the Sudan possess, however, an instrument that resembles it, or rather to some of the harps which we see represented on Egyptian monuments. The circumstances of many of our European instruments have nearly the same name in different languages, would appear to be to some extent an indication of their having been derived from the same source. Of the lute, German Laut, Italian Linto, French Luth, Dutch Luet, Swedish Luta, Spanish Laud, Arabic El Aud, we know that it is the Arabic instrument from which the others have derived. The guitar is said to have been brought from the east to Spain by the Moors. But the inhabitant of some mountainous districts in Germany had, however, from time immemorial, a somewhat similar instrument called the cithar. In Persia, Hindustan and other Asiatic countries, we find the sitar, in Nubia the kissar, and in ancient Greece the kithara. And might not also the name of the Hebrew instrument with which David subdued the evil spirit of Saul, the Kimar be related to these? Now, if we go back to the British Museum, we will see that the culture of Ur of the Chaldees in Iraq, the culture of ancient Egypt in Africa, and the culture of ancient Greece in Europe all had stringed instruments. In the section of Ur of the Chaldees, we see on display the oldest stringed instruments on the earth. And engraved on this artifact made of the Afghan mineral lapis lazuli is an image of a man playing that very instrument. Now, in the Greek section, you can see a tortoiseshell with its strings. And if you go throughout the entire Greek sections in the British Museum, on their vases you can see that they took this instrument very, very seriously. It seems that it played a very central role in the ancient Greek culture. And you can clearly see where the modern day guitar was developed from. Now, in a cabinet in the Egyptian section, you can see that they also had a stringed instrument in their culture. And when you look at Egyptian art, the female on the far left has like a harp she is playing. And the one on the far right has a similar image to the ancient Greeks that she is playing. And in 19th century photography and art, these instruments were still being played in Africa, in the Sudan, and throughout Central and West Africa. And in the little known Horniman Museum in Forest Hill in southeast London, that has a huge collection of guitars, you can clearly see that these instruments from Africa on display looks strikingly similar and very close to the Greek instruments and the Egyptian ones. And throughout Afro-Eurasia, you can see the same style. And to this very day, guess what? History just repeats itself, for men still use this instrument, whether it be for secular or for gospel music. But there's a very disturbing side to man. And there is a practice that started from antiquity, and it still exists to this very day.
Mr. Graham, Special Agent Jack Crawford, I head the Behavioral Science Unit. I need you to help me with a psychological program.
Cannibal, you have him getting to know him. I think I can help Goodwill. See his face.
The American psychological thriller television series called Hannibal was a Jeffrey Dahmer-like inspired show that glorifies one of the oldest human practices next to prostitution. Now, how long has this been around for? In a book titled The Equality of the Human Races, Joseph Furman, the Haitian barrister, journalist, and politician, when tracing the history of this ancient practice, he said, quote, "Cannibalism," Dr. Suffer explains, has existed as an institution among all peoples, that is in India, Africa, Australia, the Americas, and Polynesia. Ancient historians record the practice of the Scythians, the Scandinavians, the Celts, and the Bretons, who were a people of northwestern France who emigrated from southwestern Great Britain. In Caesar's time, the Viscounts were still consuming human flesh. Our ancestors did not escape this deplorable custom, and it is certain that cannibalism survived as a European custom for much longer than usually thought. Now, from the earliest recently discovered bones on the British Isles, through anthropological studies, it is clear that from prehistoric Britain that continues in modern day India, history hasn't repeated itself, it just hasn't stopped. This practice continues. And though men in political circles are clear that the Islamic State is a creation of Western intelligence, they were renowned for practicing high levels of cannibalism, even within their training schools. Now, growing up as a child in the UK, I used to love the Celtic Druid animation called Asterix. It was a highlight of my entertainment. And when growing up, I used to love reading the comics of Asterix, and I would submerge myself into that mythic fantasy world of ancient Europe. And my first ever knowledge of cannibalism were these deep-rooted, racially stereotyped images of people of Africa. where even in a Belgian comic about the Celts, blacks were viewed as cannibals. Now, anthropological studies has shown that cannibalism also existed like the UK in early Africa, and it still exists in some parts today. But this was a practice that existed all over the world. This painting of an Amerindian in Brazil shows a naked woman with human hands and feet. And recent studies have also shown that the Aztecs are on record for ritual cannibalism. Now, when Marco Polo, the European explorer, visited Asia, he also saw acts of cannibalism. But coming to recent times, during the Second World War in Asia, it is well documented that Japanese soldiers were practicing cannibalism among its captives. In Chairman Mao's Communist China, though it is very downplayed among that culture, there was extremely high levels of cannibalism that took place in Communist China that the Chinese have tried to cover up. But the most downplayed history of cannibalism is in and among Europeans. In a book about the Christians of the Alps called the Waldenses, the English ambassador Samuel Morland documented when they were captured, they were chopped up to pieces and then they were eaten by Catholic soldiers, where they were vomited out. It is preserved in a picture. Now, if you read the 5th century BC Greek historian and general Thucydides' book, The Peloponnesian War, he documented that they practiced cannibalism in war in Greece. The Spanish conquistadors practiced cannibalism. The English Jamestown colonists practiced cannibalism. Here is a painting of Spaniards cutting down thieves where they would eventually eat them. And these disturbing images from 1920s Russia showed that in desperation, Europeans in a famine to survive would cut out body parts to eat them. And the Smithsonian documented that cannibalism has existed in Europe for how long? From prehistory to the present. And it is quite frightening that Western scientists are still encouraging people to practice cannibalism. So cannibalism has existed as a practice among all groups all over the world. But there is one thing modern man is trying to cleverly downplay.
Tell me something. You believe in God?
Yeah.
Let's see if he believes in you.
Now, when we go throughout the Holy Scriptures, we see different civilizations throughout Afro-Eurasia who tried to put up a strong resistance to the knowledge of God in their empires. And where are they today? Fallen. But we also see men of Afro-Eurasian descent in the Holy Scriptures, individuals who stood up for the Lord. And what is so interesting about modern man is that when they try to introduce anthropological studies to disprove God, to confirm the missing link, the evidence always confirms creation, like Java Man in Indonesia. So who is at the root cause of men's hostility towards his creator? Well, we need a background check and a good history lesson to understand its roots. The UK's University of Cambridge 5 centuries ago had one of the most brilliant, sharpest and intellectual minds in the Western world, a man skilled in the Afro-Asiatic and European languages that you can see in the British Museum, the Hebrew, the Greek and the Latin. He was versed in the ancient Greco-Roman classics of Homer, Herodotus, Strabo and Josephus and Pliny the Elder. But he had very little respect for either Aristotle or Plato's philosophy, for he knew that it led to nowhere. And he schools us on the best way how we should approach history. And he said, quote, We have to treat not of the opinions of philosophers which one may either be ignorant of or refute with commendation, not of the forms of the lawyers in which we may err without damage, not of the institution of physicians, of the nature and cure of diseases wherein only our bodily health is concerned. Our arms shall be the sacred scriptures, that sword and shield of the word and all the armour of the mighty. Now what is it that has filled every age and place of the world with so many dreadful tokens of God's displeasure, but only sin? What was it that cast out the angels out of heaven and degraded them from their first station, but only sin? What was it that drove out our first parents out of paradise and subjected them and all their posterity to so many miseries, but only sin? In a word, look over all those miseries under which the whole creation groans. And though these miseries in several creatures are divers, yet do they all proceed from the same fountain, namely sin. In the 16th century court of Pope Gregory XIII, the papacy had diplomatic relations with nations from all over the world. 5 centuries later, what is the difference between William Whitaker's day and our day? Well, the papacy still has diplomatic relations with nations from all over the world, and nothing has shifted, only an increase in number. And there is no other organization in the whole world that has the most influential people on the planet who draws their allegiance to that system. But not everyone is that easily deceived. Some are very wary. In Joseph Stalin's Russia, 4 million Ukrainians in 1933 died under extreme famine. And as history always repeats itself, the modern war in the Ukraine is just a revival of that heartless, bloody conflict. As the many Western powers are trying to give people the impression that they want peace in that region. The former drag queen turned political icon, Zelensky, goes around the West begging for money and weapons to protect his nation against Russia, who Russia sees as a US-led NATO strategy to enter its borders. While Zelensky visits the Vatican to resolve this issue, others think that this is not wise.
The notion of holding negotiations in the Vatican might initially appear symbolically powerful, but upon closer examination, it becomes evident that such a setting may not be particularly suitable or diplomatically elegant, especially when one considers that predominantly Orthodox nations would be expected to engage in discussions aimed at addressing deeply rooted, structural issues within a distinctly and historically Catholic environment.
He is one of the very few in the diplomatic space that knows that the Vatican's track record is awful. For while the World Economic Forum attracts influencers, bankers, crypto lobbyists, heads of state, NGOs, and other people of high ranking, it is the technocrats who are taking us right back to William Whitaker's day, where John Fox in his Book of Martyrs said under the Papal Inquisition, the whole of society in Catholic Europe was surveillance, and today this system is being revived all over again.
We live in a world where murderers walk free, in a justice system bogged down by red tape and human error. That all ends with mercy. A judicial system powered by artificial intelligence with access to every camera, cell phone, and database. If you commit a capital crime, you have 90 minutes to prove your innocence to an AI judge, or you will be executed.
Now, in films like Spielberg's Disclosure Day, the film Nuremberg, The Three Stooges, Sister Act, and Ghostbusters, it is always the Catholic hierarchy that people run to for spiritual advice, and some of the most influential figures in the US film industry, where this will put people's guard down concerning the papacy, especially when the most popular icons, whether they be actors or directors, meet the Pope and praise him also.
I gave the Pope a New York Knicks jersey. He's the 14th Pope, so it's number 14. And the back it said Pope Leo.
What did he say?
He laughed. He smiled.
Now, William Whitaker had a strong spiritual ally, a man called Thomas Cartwright on the bottom left, who was versed in the scriptures. But occultists like John Dee on the bottom right was a master of occultism in Whitaker's day, where he was not only an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, but performed occultism in her court. And William Whitaker's strongest foe was the Italian Jesuit Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, where there was an intense conflict over the authority of the Word of God and the traditions of men. And in Whitaker's day in Catholic Europe, if you were caught with a Bible or were having a Bible study, you were both tortured and killed. What has changed? Well, as history repeats itself 5 centuries later, in many parts of the world, God's people are being persecuted. And it is not stopping anytime soon. And the most worst and dangerous place to be a Christian is North Korea. But its neighboring country, China, is also arresting people, especially preachers, where they are cracking down on the churches. And for those who think that they are safe in the West, well, guess what? Your time is coming as well. Do you want to know why? Well, because history repeats itself. And only those who spend time in the Word of God will stand. So we have looked at history from a secular perspective. And for those of you who are into ethnocentrism, sorry I had to burst your bubble, there is no such thing as a superior race. And I was very happy and fortunate to come across 2 men who I found very inspiring. Sid Meier and William Whitaker. They're the only 2 men I have studied in the West who has incorporated all human beings within inside of the human family. So in this next section, we're going to be looking at history from a biblical perspective. Do you believe that the Bible is reliable from Genesis to Revelation? Well, we shall see. Geoscience is the intricate study on how the mechanism of the earth functions. And as man continues to explore the vast terrain of the earth, observing its interconnection of its ecosystem, its topography, its demographic layout with the digital tools of computational science, he is struggling, though not openly confessing to the public, with the evidence and the barefaced realities that have always been staring right at him in his face. As this blue planet continues to expose, reveal and give up many of its hidden secrets. Man is realizing that his very early forebears were far more intuitive, sophisticated and intelligent than their 21st century successors and their AI technology. And that our forebears accomplished things that we still cannot explain and still have not outmatched. With all the different modern day technologies that man has at his disposal, that is expanding our knowledge of the past, it is slowly chipping away and humiliating his many worn out theories. And we are now beginning to realize that behind every cell, atom, smell, color, shape or sound, all these things are not products of randomness, fluke or chance, but there is a carefully well thought out design in everything by an intelligent creator. Now Bereshith is the beautiful divine model of this earth's beginnings. And though this earth may have lost its original beauty, the earth and its intricate geospatial layout still intrigues man, for he is constantly learning new things every single day. Not only is the creation model the most accurate explanation of this earth's origins, this is not rooted in just faith, but the continuous scientific discoveries that are shattering ancient pagan philosophies and modern Darwinian ideas. That all over the earth, though it is estimated that most species in the animal kingdom over time have become extinct, those that remain, whether they are aquatic, terrestrial or airborne, are all beautifully designed and perfectly adapted to its environment, are the products of a designer. What is very interesting is the constant lies, misinformation and contradictions modern science continues to spew out, claiming that creatures were wiped out by a meteorite from space, but failing to explain the creatures that lived alongside these giant reptiles that have outlived them, like the insect, the cedarwood wasp, the egg-laying mammal, the duckbill platypus, and the aquatic creatures like the horseshoe crab, the nautilus, and the recently rediscovered fish, the coelacanth. According to the divine account, every single creature in the animal kingdom were once originally at one time herbivores, which means that their diet comprised solely on plants. Now I know that this is hard for many to stomach, but what saith modern science? Well, in Manchester Museum are the skulls of alligators and crocodiles from Asia, Africa and North America. And in the British Museum in both the Sudan and in Egypt, they preserve them in their artwork. Now crocodiles are one of the many creatures that have outlived the dinosaurs, and their successors are titchy compared to their early predecessors. Now that is not quite fitting into the evolutionary table, and scientists have verified that not only do modern crocs and alligators eat fruit as a part of their diet alongside meat, but in line with the Genesis chapter 1 and the 30 account, these reptiles once had a diet that comprised of the foods in the vegetable kingdom only. And the scientific evidence is leaning a lot closer to Bereshith. The evidence is also showing that unlike the propaganda from the Jurassic Park series, the earliest reptiles on Earth, whether they be flying ones or terrestrial ones, originally had a plant-based diet. And this solidifies and has clearly confirmed the divine description of Earth's embryonic beginnings in the book of Genesis. So the Bereshith model written by Moses under the guidance of the Holy Spirit can be embraced by both faith and the recent discoveries in science. And guess what? More light is shining on man's embryonic beginnings. Now when man migrated from Ararat in Asia Minor as a small company of people to repopulate the entire earth, he probably had to go through vast rivers, forests and mountains to settle in his new habitat and dwellings. When we look at mankind, that is both male and female, you can see that he may differ on the surface in his phenotype. That is, he has different colored eyes, a different shaped nose, and different types of hair texture. Now these changes look like they are as a result according to demographics. The northern hemisphere people are a lot lighter, but in the southern hemisphere people are a lot more darker. But these differences are only surface level. We are all the same, just different shades of brown. That's all. But research in modern science is once again leading a lot closer to the Genesis account. Let us prove this. People who do not have the ability to put words or sentences together, whether they are young or old, have to go to speech therapy with a specialist that helps them to communicate a lot better. But when did man first learn to speak? Well, according to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 20, the first man was trained to be a zoologist when he named every single creature in the animal kingdom. But it was in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 2 where we hear man first speak. Now, according to the new scientists, it has confirmed that the ears of early humans could hear frequencies in speech. And scientists are also confirming that the earliest humans did have the ability to speak, where they were able to communicate with each other from early, unlike the rest of the animal kingdom. Now, with all the different scientific breakthroughs of mRNA and epigenetics, scientists still have to admit that via a DNA survey of the human genome, we are all the same, and apart from the outward differences, we are all exactly one species, and that we still carry the same genetic legacy of our early forefathers, no evolving or natural selection taking place. And the earliest fossilized bone structure confirms that man always walked upright. And yes, we were also made, as shown in a previous study, from the dust of the earth. Now, the institution of marriage was set up by God not for us to only multiply and to preserve the race, but to also preserve a balanced and stable society. And though tribes may have practiced polygamy, that ancient institution has still been preserved throughout the stress of time from antiquity to this very day, for it existed in ancient cultures all over the world. Now, in the British Museum, the Egyptians practiced it. In the Ashmolean Museum, the Romans practiced it. And in the Victorian Albert Museum, the Chinese also practiced the institution of marriage. And guess what? Like the creatures of the animal kingdom, they also had a diet of both plants and meat. And George Washington Carver, in his in-depth research on botany, confirmed the deep, healthy properties in these foods when he presented his case to the United States House of Representatives in 1921. And he said, quote, "If you go to the first book of Genesis, we can understand very clearly, I think, what God intended when he said, 'Behold, I have given you every herb that bears seed, to you it shall be for meat.' There is everything there to strengthen and nourish and keep the body alive and healthy." Was he right? Now, there is strong evidence that is coming out that a lot of the processed food that we consume in our daily diet is not safe and can lead to poorer health. And there are definite health benefits that can boost our immune system when we change our diets. And it may shock you, but this instruction comes directly from God. Now, if you ever have a good bowl or plate of lentils, my goodness, it tastes so good. But what are the health benefits of the seeds of this legume? Well, the health benefits is that it is anti-inflammatory and antibacterial. That means it reduces redness, swelling, pain, and heat. What about the small grained cereal called millet? What are its health benefits also? Well, studies have shown that it is very nutritional and therapeutic and is extremely beneficial for your health. What about the cereal grain barley that was grown in the Fertile Crescent from antiquity? Well, it also has phytochemicals and health promoting benefits, and a good intake of it in your diet can positively affect changes in cognitive functions and intestinal microbiome. Now, fitches, also known as fennel seed, also has many health benefits, where it prevents bad breath, regulates blood pressure, improves digestion, purifies the blood, and improves skin appearance. Now, wheat is very similar in that it is a good source of vitamins and minerals, and it also helps digestion and also helps to control your weight. Now, the last of these nutritional foods that I shall mention are beans. Now, why are beans important? Well, it has been described as nature's perfect food. That's deep. That has a lot of nutritional and health benefits. But what does it help to prevent? When an autopsy was performed on ancient mummies in South America, they discovered that they died from cardiovascular or heart disease. It was the same leading cause of death among the culture of the ancient Egyptians, who also had a high cardiovascular rate as a result of their lifestyle. And as the men of science scan the bodies and autopsies of deceased bodies, guess what? History still continues to repeat itself. For though in the year 2025, death rates from cardiovascular disease have fallen dramatically, which is a good thing, but sadly, according to Harvard Global Health Institute, it still remains the world's #1 killer. But if you eat beans, guess what? It can contribute to the prevention of cardiovascular or heart disease. So this food, when cooked well, not only tastes nice, but it has great health benefits. Now, who has instructed us to eat these foods? Well, in Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 9, if you look at the words highlighted in blue, God instructs us to consume or eat wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and fishes. So all of these foods that are beneficial to our health through centuries have been preserved in the Tanakh, or the Old Testament scriptures, so we can see what God is still teaching his people to this very day. So if the Holy Scriptures can be trustworthy for the details of the earth's origin and the benefits of a healthy diet, can it truly be trusted as a reliable record of human history? Well, let's see. Now, the year 2025 continued a trend that began in the middle of the 19th century and has not stopped, which is the archaeological discoveries of historical events in the Holy Scriptures. The political diplomatic correspondence between two heads of state, the king of Judah, Hezekiah, whose name means strength of Yah or God, and the Neo-Assyrian Empire's monarch, Sennacherib, whose name means sin, which is the moon god, has multiplied brothers, continues to be confirmed by recent discoveries in Jerusalem. And these finds only confirm what even at the doors has shown in previous studies. This hexagonal clay prism in the British Museum, written in Assyrian cuneiform, records Sennacherib receiving tribute money from Hezekiah, as documented in 2 Kings chapter 18 and verse 14, where both sources complement each other, and both of these kings are mentioned in a prophetic book. Now, the technology of AI seems to be shedding more light on the infamous Isaiah scroll discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the middle of the 1940s. And the official seal of the prophet Isaiah was also discovered in recent times, with his name written in 8th to 7th century BC Hebrew. And they also found the seal of King Hezekiah also, where both of these finds have strengthened the historical case for the book of Isaiah. But it was also philology, which is the study of ancient languages, that helped boost confidence in that book. Now, from left to right, French linguist Jean-François Champollion on the left continued the work of deciphering the ancient Egyptian languages, which is why we clearly understand it today. In the center is Friedrich Wilhelm Gesenius, the German Orientalist and lexicographer and Lutheran theologian, whose infamous Hebrew Chaldee lexicon gave readers an understanding of the ancient Hebrew language. And on the right is Sir Henry Creswick Rawlinson, the British East India Company Army officer who has been titled the father of Assyriology, who deciphered the Near Eastern script that has been titled cuneiform. We are greatly indebted to these men for our understanding of the past. And in the book of Isaiah, which is the most intact of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it records 5 kingdoms. Merodach Baladan in Isaiah chapter 39 and verse 1, in the background is the king of Babylon. Taharka in Isaiah chapter 37 and verse 9 is on the left, is the king of both Nubia, modern day Sudan, and Egypt, ancient Kemet. Sennacherib on the right in Isaiah chapter 36 and verse 1 is the king of Assyria. And the seal at the bottom center is of Ahaz, king of Judah, who is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 1. It is our knowledge of the ancient languages that helped us to know who these men are. These are 4 of the kingdoms, but one was prophesied by both Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel, where in the latter it is symbolically described as an animal. This world power was Medo-Persia in modern-day Iran in Western Asia. And on October 1971, the Shah of Iran invited heads of state from all over the world for the 2,500-year celebration of the Medo-Persian Empire in Persepolis. This empire was huge and very multicultural, for it had soldiers and tributaries from Afro-Eurasia, and it stretched from Africa to India, according to Esther chapter 1 and verse 1. Though no images of him survive today, its most famous monarch was King Cyrus II, also known as the Great. Though it could do with a bit of a refurbishment, his tomb still stands after 2.5 millennia. Now, it was the Assyrian-born British archaeologist Hormuz Razum who discovered the infamous Cyrus cylinder in 1879 within the Ottoman Empire in Iraq, which is now in the British Museum, and it is one of the most prized artifacts of the ancient world, for despite Cyrus's flaws, it has been recognized as the foundation for modern civil and religious liberties. But Cyrus, like King Josiah's reign, was prophesied centuries before they were on the world scene. In Isaiah chapter 45 and verse 1, he was prophesied 2 centuries before for his role in world affairs and its connection to the restoring of God's people. And he is also mentioned in Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 28, where the prophecy of him restoring the temple was fulfilled in Ezra chapter 1 and verse 2. And he is also mentioned in the opening chapter and the last verse in Daniel chapter 1. In Matthew chapter 1 verses 22 and 23, it was the first book quoted to verify where Jesus fit into prophetic time, being born of a virgin. In Luke chapter 4 and verse 17, Jesus quoted from Isaiah also to confirm who he was and how he fulfilled the Isaiah prophecy. And in Acts chapter 8 verses 27 and 28, it was the book that the Ethiopian eunuch was reading in the 53rd chapter of Isaiah before he was baptized by Philip the evangelist. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 26, and in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 4, where both Paul and John described the new earth where there will be no more death and God will wipe away our tears, they both quoted from Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 8. And in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 13, and in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 1, when they both mention a new heaven and a new earth, they both are quoting from Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 17, the first prophet to mention it in a number of times. So not only is the book of Isaiah historically accurate, but it is prophetically accurate, being the most quoted book in the New Testament alongside the Psalms, and it also prepares us for better things to come. Even with all this overwhelming evidence via linguistic and archaeological discoveries, there will still be a fight against God's word, both inside of the church and outside of the church. But one man knew that no matter how hard they fight, curse, blaspheme, and even persecute, more light will still be revealed, so nobody has an excuse. And he observed this, and this is what Dr. James Aitken Wiley said, quote, "The discovery of one truth necessitates the invention of the opposite error. In proportion as truth multiplies its point of assault, error must necessarily multiply its points of defense. the extension of the one line infers the extension of the other also. Nevertheless, there is an essential difference betwixt the two developments. Every new truth is the addition of another impregnable position to the one side, whereas every new error is but the addition of another untenable point to the other, which only weakens the defense. Truth is what? Immortal, because agreeable to the laws by which the universe is governed, and therefore the more it is extended, the more numerous are the points on which it can lean for support. Upon what? God's government. The more that error is extended, the more numerous the points on which it comes into collision and conflict with that government. Thus, the one develops into strength, but the other into weakness. In the digital age of the 21st century, it is now becoming quite clear to a number of people, well, those who bother to care, that something is a bit off in this world. We are not talking about baby boomers reminiscing about the good old days over a cup of tea. No, not at all. Something is going on in this world that is quite troubling and very tragic, though little is known about it, that has never been experienced by any other generation in human history. In London's Natural History Museum, it exhibits something called Fixing Our Broken Planet, where it displays creatures that are extinct or bordering on extinction. The aquatic ocean predator, the marlin, the koala of Australia, the horseshoe crab, the extinct auk of Europe, the rhinoceros, and the huge elephant tusks. But there is another deeper concern. Even inside of its mother's womb, a baby, sadly, is not safe. For it has been confirmed through scientific studies that air pollution particles are found on the fetal side of placentas. Yep, toxic air pollution particles are found in the lungs and brains of unborn babies. This is real sad, for air pollution affects 99% of the world's population, where it has become the second leading factor for death, especially among children. Now, you would think that this would be a concern and an alarm bell for those in the body of Christ, especially who are leaders, to wake up the world, but not at all. There is a concerning trend I have been noticing recently among many prominent ministers and influencers. They are saying that we do not need to look at Bible prophecy. We should just focus on Jesus Christ. Now, that's odd. For in Luke chapter 4 and verse 21, Jesus confirmed that he was a fulfillment of prophecy after being baptized by John the Baptist. In Luke chapter 24 and verse 44, after his resurrection, Jesus said that the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, which is the law of Moses, the Psalms and the prophets, are all fulfilled in him. And in John chapter 13 and verse 19, Jesus is very, very clear that it is prophecy that verifies and identifies who he is in time. Interesting. Now, when you set out on a long journey, you will have to have a map that will tell you your starting point and the ending point of your journey. And while driving to reach your final destination, not only do you have to know your highway code and have a sat-nav, but you are constantly looking at the signs so that you don't get lost. For if you don't have the signs on the road to guide you, you will be lost. I repeat, if you don't have the signs to guide you to your destination, you will be lost. This is why we need prophecy. Today, with the silence of the pulpits more interested in fame and making money, sadly, many people are running to the wrong individuals in desperation to tell them about the future. And you can't really blame them if no one is properly guiding them. But in Revelation chapter 13. The second half of the prophecy identifies the United States as the player on the world stage who will wrap things up in this world, where she has always spake like a dragon, where her founding fathers were war-mongering Masonic slave owners occupying other people's lands. But to cover up a multitude of sins, she has cleverly used films over the years as propaganda to cover up her history of crimes and painting this Disneyfied approach to history. But the prophecy said that she exercises all the power of the first beast or kingdom, which is the papacy, before her. For when the Vietnamese kicked out the French, she continued the Catholic Church's mission in Indochina, but she failed and got defeated. And when the Catholic monarch King Leopold II of Belgium exploited Congo for its natural resources in rubber, Donald Trump continues and exercises what his predecessors did in the old world, and continuing Spanish imperialism in Latin America. The very country that kicked out Spain is now being recolonized by the policy of Donald Trump, who is following the papal beast before him, where his predecessors already laid the foundation for what takes place in Venezuela, showing that there is no difference between Republicans and Democrats. And guess what? They always use entertainment to forewarn us of her plans 5 to 6 years ago.
What's the most major threat on the world stage? Venezuela is the single greatest resource of oil on the planet. So, why is this country in the midst of one of the greatest humanitarian crises in history?
So history just continues to repeat itself, and America's imperial colonial foreign policy is just a continuation of her distant cousins in the old world in Europe. James Monroe, the 5th US president, introduced what was nicknamed the Monroe Doctrine, and the 45th and current 47th US president, Donald Trump, restored it, nicknamed the Donroe Doctrine, which to summarize is nothing more than US expansionism in the Western Hemisphere, with the belief that it has the right to other nations' natural resources in the Americas, where it also renames territories in that region. Now I know this is quite shocking to this current generation, that is, if you don't know history, but the late US Marine Major General Smedley Butler informed the public that, quote, "I spent most of my time being a high muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer for capitalism. Thus I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for what? American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers in 1909 to 1912. I brought to light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for American fruit companies in 1903. And in China, in Asia in 1927, I helped to see that what? Standard Oil went its way unmolested. So history is just repeating itself. Now in the first year of Trump 2.0 in 2025, Trump, continuing from his predecessors, has been bombing places all around the world non-stop. But what is more uncomfortable is when you read the comments on YouTube where people are praising him from all different races, thinking that he is protecting Western civilization, where it has been noted and documented that he has carried out well over 500 bombings across the planet in 2025 alone. Now, as the world is growing more and more unequal, and with food and energy prices going up with no reversing the trends, there is little opposition to a system that wants to retain its dominance on the earth. But when you have prophecy to guide you as your compass to eternity, it properly equips you for the end. But you will have to know how to study it carefully, and this is the advice I will start you with. Now, in a book titled The Work of Jesus Christ as Our Advocate, John Bunyan schools us and says, quote, "Read and think. Read and compare what thou readest with what? The word of God. If thou findest any benefit by what thou readest, give the Father and his Son the glory, and also pray for me. If thou findest me short in this, or to exceed in that, impute all such things to my weakness, for which I am always full." In other words, as I've always advised in these studies, anything you hear from anybody, including myself, please research everything for yourself instead of venerating any man or church system. So Abraham, by faith, came out of Ur of the Chaldees to live as a nomad in the land of Canaan. But according to Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 10, he was looking for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So as we shall see in a while, we also have to come out of spiritual Babylon to enter into eternity. For the geographical realm of Canaan was just a type of what? According to William Whitaker, the kingdom of heaven. So history always repeats itself. Now, when our first parents' wrong choice disconnected us from God and took away that spiritual covering, the first thing God gave to them was a promise in a prophecy that has guided God's people throughout the ages. But what is the real overall objective and aim of Bible prophecy? Well, in 1 John chapter 3 verses 2 and 3, it says in verse 3 that it purifies us. And in 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 19, it says that the day star, who is Jesus Christ, according to Revelation chapter 22 and verse 16, should be manifest in our hearts. So the overall aim of Bible prophecy is to guide us and not to spend hours studying and focusing on signs, symbols and dates and fighting each other over interpretation. But it should draw you a lot closer to God, where a heavenly character is being formed within our hearts. Now, on the Isle of Patmos during the reign of the assassinated Roman Emperor Domitian, the very misunderstood book of Revelation was written, and today the science of archaeology is confirming the historical accuracy of the places named in that book. And though most of it has been fulfilled, the closing stages of the events are being fulfilled with the very last church, Laodicea, where history will be constantly repeating itself, as we shall see in a while. Now, when was it written, and how can we understand it? Well, in a volumed set titled The Family Expositor, the 18th century English minister and writer Philip Doddridge said, quote, "This prophetic book is entitled The Revelation of Jesus Christ, which he sent and signified by his angel to his servant John. In a few years after it was written, it was numbered among the apostolic writings by the churches of Asia, the neighboring churches of Syria and Samaria in the east, the more distant ones of Africa, Egypt in the global south, and Rome and the other churches of Europe in the west. There is, in my opinion, very little reason to doubt that the John here mentioned was the evangelist of that name and the author of the 3 epistles. For concerning this John, antiquity agrees that he was banished to Patmos in the reign of Domitian for his adherence to the Christian faith. Now, another writer in the 19th century guides us on how to understand it. And Dr. James Aitken Wiley said, quote, "The Apocalypse is, in brief, a history of the church, written in grand symbolical characters, from the ascension of Christ to his second and glorious coming, on the little stage of where? Patmos." Now, the key of the Apocalypse, which is the rightful title of the book of Revelation, is to be sought where? In the Old Testament scriptures. This is, in the briefest and perhaps the best, the rule that can be laid down for the interpretation of this book. All that is necessary to the right interpretation of the prophecy is to give to each of its component symbols its appropriate meaning. In Daniel, we are told that a wild beast is the symbol of a conquering and despotic power, and that a horn denotes a kingdom. We meet the same symbol in the Apocalypse. So as it uses Old Testament land of Canaan imagery and language as object lessons in the book of Revelation, that will be repeated over again in the New Testament church, we are preparing ourselves for a new Jerusalem built by God, and will not be defending an earthly one where moth and rust does corrupt and where thieves break through and steal. So let us briefly look at the principles of typology, which is, in brief, history repeating itself over and over again. Now, we are shown that recent scientific discoveries is definitely strengthening the Bereshith Genesis description of Earth's origins. And Charles Darwin in the 19th century attempted to remove that worldview from the thinking of man. But in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7, though there will be a new earth, God still wants us to recognize that He is the creator of both heaven and earth. And this is the account in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. Now, let us look at the principle of typology. In Daniel chapter 7 and verse 4, the kingdom of Babylon is symbolically represented as a lion with eagle's wings. And it was Sir Austin Henry Layard, the British archaeologist, who opened the doors to us having a clearer, in-depth understanding of that system. It still impacts to this very day, as we still use the base 60 counting system in maths. This artifact in the British Museum documents the fall of Babylon, and Daniel, Isaiah and Jeremiah prophesied of its fall. But though it fell as a kingdom, its system still remains, for in museums across Europe, the men in the religious system wore the fish mitre on their heads in their religious services, and in the modern Babylonian system, the papacy, the Roman Catholic cardinals continue to wear the headgear of the Babylonian Assyrian system. But this Babylonian system will also experience the same fate as its predecessor. For in Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 8, it foretold of the fall of the literal Babylonian system. And in Revelation chapter 18 and verse 2, it prophesies the fall of Mystery Babylon. History just repeating itself. And in Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 6, God said to his people in the Old Testament, "Come out of Babylon and don't be influenced by this system." And in Revelation chapter 18 and verse 4, Jesus, speaking to his church worldwide, forewarns us to also come out of that system. Why? For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So you see, history repeats itself over and over again. Now, there was a time in Egyptian history that God covered it with darkness because of their stubbornness. And when you parallel the plagues of Egypt in Exodus and the 7 vials in Revelation chapter 16, the darkness, boils, blood, hail and the frogs is history just repeating itself over again. Before the children of Israel entered the land of Canaan, they had to confront a huge coalition of armies. But in Joshua chapter 10 and verse 11, God intervened by sending hailstones from heaven to destroy the enemy. And in Revelation chapter 16 and verse 21, before we enter the spiritual land of Canaan, the Lord will drop hailstones from heaven again when we are surrounded by a global army. History repeating itself over again. Now, in recent times, archaeologists have discovered the famous battleground called Megiddo, where the children of Israel fought and had many different battles. Now, there was a time that people questioned whether this place was real or actually existed, as documented in the New York Times in the year 2000. But in the year 2025, that is a quarter of a century later, archaeologists have rediscovered the ancient biblical battleground of Megiddo. And as Dr. Wiley said, truth will continue to shine while error has no foundation to stand on. And artifacts at Megiddo confirmed that the clash between King Josiah of Judah and Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt is true. And it confirms that the chroniclers of 2 Kings chapter 23 and verse 29, who mention the 26th dynasty Pharaoh, were historically accurate. Argument done. No further questions, Your Honor. So the kings at Canaan who fought at Megiddo in a local geographical location in Judges chapter 5 and verse 19 will be reenacted over again in Revelation chapter 16 verses 14 and 16, but this time on a global scale, where Joshua chapter 10 and verse 5 and Revelation chapter 16 verses 14 and 16 uses the exact same language. They gathered themselves together. So, the book of Revelation, especially the events at the end, is written in a style called typology, which is just history repeating itself over and over again. Simple. But the everlasting gospel has to be preached to the whole world as instructed in the book of Revelation. And what happened in the apostolic age will be repeated over again just prior to the second coming of Christ. Now, in the early church, the gospel went to the African continent, penetrating into the region of the peoples of Northeast Africa first. It started with the peoples of the Orient in the Middle East, and it spread further east to the people of India in Southeast Asia, who also experienced apostolic Christianity. It also spread among the peoples of the European continent, where many of the Pauline letters that were in the New Testament were written to that community of people. And it was Armenia where the human family first migrated from to repopulate the earth, where archaeologists have found the oldest human brain, the oldest leather shoe, the oldest skirt, and the oldest winery on earth, with a culture shifting from worshipping the heavenly bodies such as the sun embraced the everlasting gospel, becoming one of the oldest Christian nations on the earth, where it became the first to establish it as a state religion. It is when you pay a visit to the British Museum that you get a picture of what man worshipped in Afro-Eurasia. Deities like Sekhmet, the feline Egyptian goddess of destruction, on the left, Vishnu, the Indian god of preservation, in the center, and Bacchus, the Greek god of drunken debauchery, on the right. And when you look at the very strange looking face mask from Africa, and the Gorgon from ancient Greece, and Raga Raga, the Buddhist wisdom deity, you can see that the gospel turned men from these idols. But when you go into the bookshops and libraries, the apostolic success with all different ethnic groups is very unknown. And every single book about Christianity only mentions the European races. Outsiders are deleted. But there is one Western scholar who has preserved this history in his writings, and William Whitaker is an absolute rare gem for helping us have a clearer understanding of the past. And he said, quote, Chrysostom, in his first homily upon the Gospel of John, writes that the Syrians, Egyptians, Indians, Persians, Ethiopians, and innumerable other nations had translated the divine doctrines into their own language. All Asia Minor used the Greek language in their service. Now, Irenaeus in Lib 1 C3 says that in his time, churches were found in the East, in Egypt, in Spain, in Germany, and in Gaul. Harding, Article 3, Section 38 writes that the Armenians, Russians, Ethiopians, Dalmatians, and Muscovites read the scriptures in their own vernacular tongue. Now, the scriptures should be translated into all languages of Christendom, that all may be enabled to read them in their own tongue. Jerome translated the scriptures into Dalmatian. Ulfilas Rolphilus, a bishop of the Goths, translated the scriptures in the Gothic language in order that the people might learn them. Chrysostom translated the scriptures into the Armenian language. And there were certainly bishops in all those parts of Africa, in Namibia and Mauritania, who cherished a tender solicitude for the salvation of their souls. The Oriental churches were composed of Greeks. Now, all of the canonical books of the Old Testament were written by prophets in the prophetic tongue, which was the language of Canaan. They all wrote in Hebrew except a few pieces which we find composed by Daniel and Ezra in Chaldee. The Chaldee tongue is near akin to the Hebrew. For at the time Christ was upon the earth, the Jews did not speak Hebrew but Syriac. Now, the Romans had the widest empire, yet Cicero himself in his oration for the poet Archias bears witness that the language of the Greeks was more widely extended than that of the Romans. Formerly, the Greek language had various dialects, the Ionic, the Doric, and the rest, yet all Greeks were able to understand each other. And the language of the Africans is the same as the Phoenicians, with only a little alteration. Now, I confess that God preserves his doctrine from Adam to Moses, how? Orally transmitted, that is, in the form of unwritten tradition. It cannot be denied. So God has preserved his holy word throughout the ages through the preservation of oral tradition, through eyewitness accounts, and also preserving his truth in stone and in books. And with all of the recent scientific discoveries in the animal kingdom, the deciphering of ancient languages, and the constant archaeological discoveries confirming true historical events in the Bible, when the gospel, like the apostolic church, goes to every single nation, tongue, and people, nobody will have an excuse when Jesus Christ returns. As this study comes to a close, I have been observing of recent that there are many influencers in social media who are reintroducing Gnostic arguments. Remember, history repeats itself, where they are attacking the divinity, the character, the nature, and the mission of Jesus Christ, falsifying and making the claim that the Lord Jesus Christ is not authentic. Their presentations are influencing and affecting open-minded truth seekers, leaving a lasting impression with an already very confused and vulnerable generation that sadly researches very little what they hear and never go to the source. Now, the mistake Christians make when defending Jesus is that they try to explain heavenly spiritual concepts to a naturalist secular mind, when 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14 is very, very clear that it is utterly foolishness unto them. Only those with spiritual discernment who are led by the Spirit will understand by faith God's word. And William Whitaker is very clear that it cannot be proved by human reasons that Christ was born a virgin, rose from the dead, and ascended up to heaven with his body. For no saving truth can be known without the Holy Spirit, for the Holy Ghost is the author of faith. Now, the book of Daniel, centuries before it came onto the world stage, prophesied the rise of the Roman Empire, and 3 of its leaders are mentioned by name in the New Testament. Now, in the British Museum is Caius Octavius, better known as Caesar Augustus. He was prophesied in Daniel chapter 11, and he was recorded in Luke chapter 2 and verse 1. His successor, Tiberius Caesar, is mentioned in Luke chapter 3 and verse 1, who is prophesied in Daniel chapter 11 verses 21 and 22 when he deals with the Prince of the Covenant. And his successor, Claudius Caesar, is recorded in Acts chapter 11 and verse 28 and Acts chapter 18 and verse 2. He was poisoned and killed by his 3rd wife, the mother to his successor, Nero. Now, in a book titled The Apologies of Justin Martyr, this early church apologist, who lived just after the apostles, confirms that the Gospels were written in their day and not after. Quote, "For the apostles, in the memoirs composed by them, which are called Gospels, have thus delivered unto us what was enjoined to them. First witness." And just after him, Tertullian of Carthage, in what is modern-day Tunisia in North Africa, also knew the Gospels were written by the apostles and not men after they died. And this is also confirmed by William Whitaker, who said, quote, "Tertullian in his prescription says that the very autographs of the apostles themselves were what? Preserved in his time, safe in the churches. Second witness." Now, the Macedonian ruler Alexander, who the Greco-Roman world called the Great, but the Medo-Persians called a destructive tyrant, left a legacy that still lasts to this very day. In Daniel chapter 8 verses 5 and 21, he is prophetically described as a he-goat who geographically comes from the Occident, or as the words highlighted in green says, the West. That clearly shows us that the Western world is the last powers on this earth. His Greek culture impacted and trickled into the Roman Empire, where William Whitaker said that Cicero documented that the Greek influence was still dominant within the Roman Empire, especially the language, but Jesus spoke in Aramaic. So why would the New Testament be written in a language that he didn't speak? Well, the phrase lingua franca means language spoken or understood by various peoples over a wide area. And as the Roman Empire stretched from Western Europe to the Middle East and in North Africa, according to National Geographic, it is common sense that the gospel is written in a language that everyone within the empire can relate to and understand, so there is no confusion. But there is more evidence. Now, in Egypt, an amazing discovery was unearthed that strengthened the authenticity of the gospel. This small manuscript was then taken from Egypt in Africa to England in Europe, in a city called Manchester in the north of England, in a Gothic style looking building called the John Rylands Library. This library is very, very interesting, for it has a high volume of archaic books. But Colin Anderson Roberts, a classical scholar, records one of its most prized possessions, and he documented it in a book titled An Unpublished Fragment of the False Gospel that was published in 1935. And he said, quote, "A small fragment as yet unpublished papyri in the possession of the John Rylands Library is the earliest known fragment of the New Testament in the world, and probably the earliest witness to the existence of the gospel according to St. John." Now, in my hand I have a replica of this fragment purchased from Etsy. of John's Gospel that is written in Greek. And this Gospel just sits quietly in a cabinet in this library/museum. And this artifact is a gem. That's why I had to have a little selfie moment with it. For this is the Gospel that clearly points out Jesus' divinity. I quoted it a lot when I used to have regular debates with Muslims that kept them quiet back in the day. Its accounts match up to the description of the day. For John chapter 6 and verse 1 describes the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Now in the works of Flavius Josephus, the Roman Jewish historian, he also confirms that this place existed when he said, quote, "And now Herod the Tetrarch, who was in great favor with Tiberius, built a city of the same name with him, and called it," what? "Tiberias. He built it where? In the best part of Galilee, at the lake of Gennesareth." Now in Daniel chapter 9 and Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 prophesied the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem. And if you ever pay a visit to Rome, Emperor Titus has an arch that was built as a memorial to that destruction. Flavius Josephus also details this destruction in his book, The Jewish War. And in that destruction, there was the famous Pool of Siloam that has only been rediscovered in recent times by archaeologists. Now, modern critics say that the Gospels were written centuries after the Apostles, but only an eyewitness could record this pool that is documented in John chapter 9 and verse 7. So the recent discoveries disproves the critics. And almost all authors say very plainly, William Whittaker says, that the Gospel, as well as his epistles, was written by John while he was still alive after his exile on the Isle of Patmos. Today, entertainment is swamped with films that talk about the destruction and the end of the world. But they leave you with no hope, nothing to look forward to but an emaciated world. But when the disciples asked Jesus, what would be one of the signs of his second coming? He said in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 37, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." In other words, history just repeats itself over again. Now with this clear insight from Genesis to Revelation, you all have a choice of which side of eternity you want to be on. Nobody can make that choice for you but yourself. So the ball is now in your court. Well, I hope that this study challenged you and provoked you. Even though the doors was not created for you to feel comfortable, but uncomfortable. Because any Christian who preaches the truth, it will make people unsettled. So these studies are designed to make you uncomfortable and to challenge you and to provoke you and to make you look within. I am planning to do a part 2 of this study before I go into the Nephilim series. And I encourage you, once again, please research everything you see in this study, and I really hope and pray that this makes you get closer to God.